Okay, and we're back. So, as I teased last week, I recently watched the newest Disney Plus Star Wars live-action TV show, Ahsoka, and have a lot of issues with it. It has some interesting stuff in there that I think we could kind of discuss, but overall, I'd say it's not the best show out there. But let's break it down. Welcome to the newest episode of SDW.
Super Dario World!
So, like I said, the show's kind of stupid. I should say it's really stupid. It feels more kind of like a kiddie show, and it has a bunch of ridiculous stuff in it. And I hate it. Hate it, many things in it. But it does feel like a Star Wars show. Again, it feels like a kiddie show. If you ever watched Rebels, a lot of people have this issue. You needed to watch Clone Wars to know who Ahsoka is. You needed to watch Rebels to understand who Sabine Wren and all those other characters are, who Ezra is. And you kind of needed to watch, was it Boba Fett or The Mandalorian? I think it was The Mandalorian. You needed to watch The Mandalorian Season 2 to fully understand a few more things, or at least to, bring everything together. So I'm going to make things easy for you and kind of explain what you need to watch or what you really don't need to watch, or kind of just skip through certain things and just start on the show. So before I get into that, let me just give you a quick reminder. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, everything, all that stuff. It really helps me out. Comments, questions, or suggestions, you can find me at Dario SDW and at Super Dario World. But all right, let's get into it. So I'd say there's a Clone Wars 3D animated movie, and then there's a animated show. I think both of those are actually, the movie's okay. The animated show is actually pretty fun to watch. It's actually pretty cool. So I recommend watching that one. I didn't watch Rebels. I watched the first episode, and I was like, this is a little kid's show. Don't really care for it, so I didn't really continue watching it. However, I think you can get away with it. You can get away without watching Rebels, and you can kind of figure things out. Here are the things that you need to know in order to be able to watch Ahsoka, and I guess some of these things will be spoilers. First off, who the fuck is Ahsoka? Ahsoka Tano is the Padawan learner for Anakin Skywalker. She apparently only appears during the Clone Wars. She does not appear before. She does not appear afterwards. That's why she doesn't appear in any of the number movies. Ahsoka Tano is not a full Jedi warrior. During the Clone Wars, she kind of got tricked into doing something stupid, or she got framed into doing something. I don't know. It was a while ago. She got framed for something, so she got kicked out of Jedi Order. Then she proved her innocence, and when she was accepted back into the Jedi Order, she was like, you know what? Screw you guys. You didn't believe in me. I'm going home. And so she left the Jedi Order. That's why she wasn't as involved in the events that led to, or that's why she's not really mentioned afterwards. That's kind of the excuse they give you, right? She survives Order 66, and then pretty much then does all the adventures in Rebels that I really did not follow. Now, in Rebels, they deal with a Grand Admiral called Grand Admiral Thrawn. Grand Admiral Thrawn is the main antagonist in the series of books written by Timothy Zahn called Heir to the Empire. Those books, or the first book's called Heir to the Empire. That book is phenomenal. It's one of the best things I've ever read sci-fi wise. And I mean sci-fi, because usually I have to always make this distinction, and always people get mad at me. To me, Star Wars is not sci-fi, it's fantasy. And if you watch Ahsoka, it's fantasy. Now, it's fantasy in a sci-fi setting because it's in space, but it's closer to fantasy. And I'll give you examples from Ahsoka that prove my point. But basically, it's a sci-fi book. It's really well handled, and Thrawn is a phenomenal, brilliant, evil villain that goes up against the main protagonists from the number movies, which are Luke Skywalker, Leia, and Han Solo. So that's kind of who the Rebels deal with in the Rebels TV show. That by itself is particularly annoying. And by the way, the Rebels are like, there's a Jedi Padawan who survived called Ezra and his master. You got Sabine Wren, who's a Mandalorian. You got Hera Syndulla, who's a pilot, and a robot called Hu Yang. I think he makes an appearance there. and Ahsoka makes appearances there every once in a while. So basically, that ragtag group of rebels saves a planet from Thrawn. And the way to save this planet from Thrawn is that they make friends with giant intergalactic space whales who apparently have the ability to travel to jump in space, travel at the speed of light. Well, they travel at light speed, that's how they say it in Star Wars, but they know to make a jump in space. Again, this isn't sci-fi, this is pure bullshit. It's fantasy. It's pure fantasy, but it exists in that world. And so these giant space whales take Thrawn's ship and along with Ezra, the Padawan learner, the Padawan, now Jedi, I guess, at that point, off somewhere else. They disappear. And so that's why everybody assumes that they're dead, right? Because you haven't heard of Thrawn in a while. Now, the series Ahsoka takes place after the fall of the Empire, and it is Ahsoka's belief that one of Thrawn's lackeys, disciples, is chasing after Thrawn. She wants to find where Thrawn is. And again, this is where the show gets really stupid. So that's kind of what you need to know. That's who Ahsoka is. Ahsoka is the Padawan learner of Anakin Skywalker, and the rebels are just a group of rebels who beat Grand Admiral Thrawn and sent him somewhere off into space. That's kind of, whoops, I'll have to delete that. That's kind of all you need to know in order to be able to start the show Ahsoka. Now, the show does a lot of things, again, that really infuriates me. As I mentioned, intergalactic space whales. Annoying, but fantasy nonetheless. Again, it's really little kiddish. My main issue with the show is that the storyline follows the same stupid thing that they did in one of the worst Star Wars movies, which is Episode 9. The show begins with Ahsoka trying to find an ancient map that will lead her to Thrawn. Now, if you're keeping score here, Thrawn disappeared maybe a couple decades ago, and she's trying to find an ancient map that'll lead him to him. You know how in Episode 9 they were trying to find this ancient dagger to lead them to the Death Star, with the place of Death Star, all that stuff? And you remember how stupid it was? It's equally or even more stupid in Ahsoka, because they already did it before and everybody hated it. So they doubled down on stupid. So that's really annoying. They did that. They follow these things of characters just surviving because of bullshit, which really annoys me. I hate it when characters survive because of bullshit. I like it when they survive when they're competent. I'll give you the perfect example. There's a moment where Ahsoka and Sabine Wren are on their ship and they get, their engines get shut down, and so they have enemies making passes at them in space, trying to completely to double tap them. And the way, this is the ship flying in space, it's just floating in space, defenseless, and they keep making passes in space. They don't need to they could just float there, stay there, and just and not stop shooting ever, but they keep doing passes because the enemies are idiots, or the writers think that the audience is a bunch of idiots, and that way the characters can survive in the ship. It's really stupid. It's really dumb. I hate it. But again, it's a little kid show. Ahsoka does one thing that I do like. I should probably mute that. Ahsoka does do one thing that I really enjoyed in the show, and that's that they brought back the element of, let's say, hereditary, of lineage, kind of, in a way. And Episode 5 is the one that I really loved, because in Episode 5 they bring back Hayden Christensen to play Anakin Skywalker in a ghost version of him, right? And that episode, 2 thumbs up. Phenomenal. It's great to see Hayden Christensen back, and they do something that I consider kind of important. Now, the topic of lineage has always been very important in Star Wars, and I remember in Episode 8 when they tried to get rid of that with Rey and all that stuff, and I hated it because they don't understand the symbolism. And it's not necessarily the bloodline thing. It's about kind of who the bloodline is important. The Skywalker bloodline is important, but it's also kind of the line of who your master has been, who's trained you, the ideology that you've been trained with. And Ahsoka is part of a very unorthodox line of Jedi. So just to go through it really quickly, because they don't cover this, by the way, but they kind of bring it up. They limit it to Anakin and Ahsoka. But to go through it very quickly, because it's fun, and it's actually funner than speaking about the actual show. The line kind of starts with Yoda. Then Yoda has a Padawan. He teaches somebody else, and that person is the master of Count Dooku. You know, remember Count Dooku, Darth Tyrannus. So Count Dooku then is the Padawan master of Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, Qui-Gon Jinn and Dooku did not really get along too well because Dooku's kind of a dick. But Dooku's an interesting character here because he was paranoid. He was always expecting to get betrayed, and he saw the rot and corruption in the Senate. He saw the rot and corruption in the Jedi Council, and he hated it. And so he just, you know what, F this. He left. So again, he's the first one in that line that we know of that actually left the Jedi path. He abandoned it. He's from a line of people who abandoned the path, apparently. He's the first one to do it. And to be fair, he was kind of right. I mean, if you watched episode 3 and episode 2, he ended up kind of being correct, right? You have no idea how deep the rot goes and all that stuff. So he had his points. Again, he was played by a Sith, but let's just say his heart was kind of in the right place. There was something wrong with the Senate and with the Jedi in general. So fair enough. Then you get Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon was also a maverick in his own right. He didn't follow the Jedi path completely. In fact, he kind of deviated from it several times. He didn't follow the rules specifically. He wanted to do things his own way. Even, I believe in episode 1, Obi-Wan is the person who tells him, like, Master, if you would just follow the code, you would be on the council. And so, tells you kind of a bit about him. Now, fun fact, Obi-Wan Kenobi is Qui-Gon Jinn's third Padawan learner. He had, the first one did okay, he did normal. The second actually turned to the dark side. So you can kind of see there, again, same line of Jedi, second one that kind of goes to the dark side, if you're following my drift. Then the third one's Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is interesting. I recommend that you actually read the storyline. By the way, a lot of these things, like I wanted to verify through Wikipedia and stuff, I noticed that Wikipedia has pronouns on it, and I hate it. So it tells you, like, I don't know, Darth Vader, male, gender, male, pronouns, he, him. I fucking hate it. It's stupid. Keep it out of Star Wars. I'm actually going to start a freaking change.org petition to get that thing nixed out of there. It makes no fucking sense. I hate it. Can you imagine? Yoda, I am. He, him, my pronouns are. It's stupid. It's retarded. Get it the fuck out of Star Wars. Keep your stupid real world shit out of fiction. It's stupid. You're ruining it. What's the rant this dude did? Keep current day out of it. You're ruining it. You're taking us out of it. You're making suspension of disbelief that much harder. But yeah, anyway, to continue. What was I saying? So I actually recommend you read the story between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. That's interesting because after his Padawan went to the dark side, Qui-Gon was like, no, I'm never training another Padawan again. And then Obi-Wan Kenobi comes along, and Obi-Wan was about to turn 13. Which, when you're a Jedi, you turn 13, and nobody picks you up as a Padawan learner, they send you off to be a farmer, basically. Or to basically be the administration, to the food corps, basically. And Obi-Wan's like, you're my last hope. As to, save me, Qui-Gon Jinn, you're my only hope. And Qui-Gon was like, no. So they fate, you could say, or the Force ended up bringing those two together. But it's interesting to see how, how Qui-Gon did not initially want Obi-Wan. He wanted to save Obi-Wan, not necessarily from his path, but he was also worried that Obi-Wan had it in him to turn to the dark side. Now, the reason he said that is because apparently during a duel that Qui-Gon witnessed, he saw that Obi-Wan was kind of too brutal or too aggressive, which is interesting because later on, if you're interested at all in lightsaber dueling techniques and all that stuff, which is pretty interesting, like which one matches better with the other one. Like, for example, Mace Windu, which is Samuel L. Jackson's character, he has a very unique style. He created that style himself, and it's meant specifically to counter the Sith style. And so he's kind of on the edge of the dark side, but he doesn't go through, and it's designed specifically to defeat the dark side. That's why, he whoops Sidious like it's nothing. On the other hand, Obi-Wan Kenobi's style is more defensive. And I don't remember where I read this conversation, or even if it was like a fanfic or something, but I remember a conversation between Mace Windu and Obi-Wan, and where Mace asks him the question, who do you think is better, me who created my own unique style, or you who perfected the ancient style? And so it's interesting to, again, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and so it's interesting because his style switched from being kind of too aggressive to perfecting the defensive style, and again, that has to do with the teachings of Qui-Gon Jinn and all that stuff. Anyway, that leads us to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who lost his master to a Sith. And if you remember that fight against Darth Maul, when Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of got angry, he was about to lose it, then he calmed down and he was able to defeat him and all that stuff, defeating Darth Maul. He defeated him kind of honing the Force and all that stuff, and being clever and whatever, doing something that Darth Maul believed to not be possible, which is, I guess, jumping over him. But you know what they say about Obi-Wan? He becomes more powerful when when the higher ground appears. He doesn't have to be on the high ground. As long as there's a higher ground, he becomes more powerful. But by the way, that's my favorite stupidest conspiracy theory. Anyway, that brings us to Obi-Wan and Anakin. Anakin, there's an argument that Anakin never did anything really wrong because he was always fated to do what he did. He was, even from the very beginning, his fate was to bring the balance to the Force. Now, the Jedi were arrogant in what that meant. They thought that would mean, I don't know, he's going to clean up the Jedi way. He's going to fix everything. But in reality, it turned out being closer to, well, there's only 2 Sith, and there's a million Jedi, so I'm gonna bring that number down. So you could say, can you blame somebody for following his fate, his destiny? It's like one of those things that I often ask people, like, if you're, know anything about Christianity, I like asking people about Judas, like, because they say that in the deepest circle of hell, there's like 3 people at the bottom, and I believe it's Brutus, it's Judas, and there's somebody else, like the biggest betrayers in history. And I'm like, does Judas really deserve that? Because Jesus did say to Judas, he did tell Judas, you will betray me. And at that point, there's nothing Judas can do but betray him, because God is saying you will betray me. So if you don't betray him, that means that you're proving that he's not God. And so you don't have a choice. He's saying what you lost your free will at that point. So I'm like, wow, man, is Anakin a victim of fate there? I don't know. It's still, listen, dude had 2 genocides. Like, he genocided the younglings, and he genocided before that the Tusken Raiders. Everybody seems to overlook the Tusken Raiders for some reason. I guess it's because it turned on Natalie Portman, Padme Amidala, and she banged him afterwards. Like, I killed them, the women and the children too. And Padme was like, that's so fucking hot. But I mean, anyway, that's neither here nor there. Again, that's all good fun. The prequels have their charm, even if it's mostly stupidity. But it brings us to Anakin, and now Anakin, trained by Obi-Wan. With Obi-Wan, you could say maybe he was ready for the trials, but he wasn't ready to be a master yet. He did come in way old, Anakin, way old to be, to go into the temple and all that stuff. So there's a lot of red flags, for starters. Losing the mom, being with an unseasoned master, all that good stuff. Then that guy once he becomes a Jedi Knight himself, and after breaking his vows, he becomes the master of Ahsoka. And so watching the Clone Wars is interesting because I hadn't really considered this. And now we're coming to Ahsoka. So watching Ahsoka and the Clone Wars is interesting because I never actually considered how things looked from her perspective. And in the very last scene where Ahsoka sees Anakin, before he goes to Coruscant to save, the Chancellor from, Sidious from being kidnapped by Dooku. They didn't know it was a trap, but whatever. Before that, you didn't really see Anakin become evil. She didn't actually see the things that corrupted him. Now, there were hints here and there that he was, to quote Hu Yang, intense, that he was prone to anger, that he, that he fed off that, negative energy and all that stuff. But she didn't see it. And so us as the audience, we saw episode 3, we kind of saw the things that pushed him over the edge and all that stuff. And some of them are silly, honestly. They could have done it differently, but regardless, that's how they did it. And so I never actually considered the disconnect and the inner turmoil that Ahsoka must feel within herself. Like, I just saw my master, the last time I saw him, he was the greatest master. He was a great guy. He was a good friend. He was a loving husband. He loved me. He loved everything. Why did he turn evil? Why did he kill younglings? And so in episode 5, they kind of deal with that turmoil, and Ahsoka kind of dealing that within herself. Her being like, well, if I didn't see it in him, maybe I don't see it in myself. So it's interesting. That part is super interesting. That's the best episode of the series by far. They go into the Clone Wars. It looks phenomenal. My only issue with it would be that Hayden Christensen coming back, that dude is too good with a freaking lightsaber to be wasted on a fight with freaking Rosario Dawson. Now, the fights overall in the show kind of suck because the people they used to fight are not particularly great. But there's a moment there because Hayden Christensen is fighting. By the way, Hayden Christensen plays Anakin Skywalker. There's a moment where Anakin is fighting Ahsoka. By the way, Rosario Dawson does a phenomenal job as Ahsoka. She even mimics her facial expressions. Like, Ahsoka does a particular fight phase that Rosario Dawson mimics perfectly. She did a great job on everything except the fight because, she can't match the fighting abilities of a cartoon. It's impossible. So it looks everything a little bit slower. I didn't like the fight she had with Hayden Christensen because Hayden Christensen is too good with a freaking lightsaber. Again, lightsabers aren't real, but he was too good with it. The only person who could actually match him are stunt doubles or freaking Ewan McGregor. And I highly recommend this. Watch behind the scenes footage of Hayden training to fight with a lightsaber or of Ewan McGregor. Those dudes are really good. That's why the two best fights in the Star Wars franchise overall, even the animated ones, is Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon versus Darth Maul. I think that's my favorite so far. That's my favorite overall. And the second best one is the fight, in Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan versus Anakin. It's phenomenal. They're almost perfect fights. And it's because those two are so good at fighting. Again, it was a really good casting job, I guess. But anyway, in Ahsoka, there's a moment where Hayden does a little move that goes vroom, 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 and I'm like, dude, this guy, he's been itching to do that. He's been itching to get back in that ring, and it sucks because you could see how good he is and how quickly he could have just killed Rosario Dawson, but they kind of have to play it like, Ahsoka's holding her own, so it sucks, but it did make me smile. So again, watching that, it makes me smile. Time has made me appreciate Hayden Christensen a little bit more in his performance. I think it was terribly written, but at least what the dude gave us, the fights on screen, that's good enough. That's all we needed from him, pretty much. But anyway, I digress. Coming back to Ahsoka. I've already complained about the ridiculousness of the plot. I already complained about, again, freaking space whales, intergalactic space whales, how stupid and fantasy and all that stuff. But the biggest crime that this show does, again, the good part was bringing back Hayden Christensen and kind of resolving the lineage stuff. And I added a whole bunch of stuff that's not on the show. That's just for fun that I added. But the biggest crime this show is the way that they used. My favorite part, honestly, is David Tennant's character. He voices Hu Yang, who's a droid, and that droid basically just wrecks Sabine Wren left and right every single time with logic. It's hysterical. I love him. He was probably my favorite part of the show. Just because watching him wreck Sabine Wren is phenomenal, because I don't particularly like Sabine Wren. They introduced the Fallen Jedi, or I guess you could say kind of like, how there's Jedi and then there's Gray Jedi? Well, there's Sith and then there's Gray Sith, and they introduced two characters that are Gray Sith or Fallen Jedi, played by Ray Stevenson, by the way. R.I.P. Ray Stevenson, you will be missed. He did a good job. They they set something up that looks interesting for the future of that character. I don't know who's going to take over the role of Baylan Skoll, but big shoes to fill, because Ray Stevenson is the man. For those of you who don't know who Ray Stevenson is, if you ever watched the TV show Rome, he played Titus Pullo. Oh, by the way, maybe the greatest TV show of all time, Rome, and he plays Titus Pullo in it, one of the co-main characters. You may have also seen, he played the Punisher in the second Punisher movie, the Warzone, the movie that sucked, but he was there. Where else might you have seen him? I don't know, doesn't matter. The big one is, of course, Rome. But anyway, I digress. Those things I liked. The thing I hated is what they did with Thrawn. Thrawn, again, is a S-tier level villain. He's IQ, and he's not a villain in the same way that Sidious was a villain, or that Vader was a villain, with power and stuff. Well, Sidious because he's conniving and also like supposedly the fastest Sith ever or whatever, or Vader who's raw power with the Force and all that stuff, and brutal. No, this dude is intellectual. He's smart. And he's he's a chess player. He's a 5D chess player. And in the book, specifically, just focusing on Heir to the Empire, he was, in the book, he's a Grand Admiral that he was sent to kind of the Outer Rims to quell down the Outer Rims, because the main reason, they don't say this in the books, but I had a conversation with Timothy Zahn, and Timothy Zahn is, the author of Heir to the Empire, and he explained that the Emperor and Vader didn't like him because he was an alien, and so they didn't kind of trust him because he's not human, he's an alien. So they didn't like him because of that, and also they got an off vibe off of him, and sometimes they felt he was too smart for certain things. So there was an envy thing, there was like a racist thing, and so they sent him over to the Outer Rims because they did need somebody out there, but that way they kept him away from Coruscant and all the politics and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, you go out there and fix all that stuff. It's kind of, I think he got the inspiration kind of from the American Civil War. You know how, for those of you who don't know, the American Civil War, basically the North, or the Yankees, they had their B team fighting against the South's A team. So the South had General Lee and Stonewall Jackson fighting against a bunch of B level generals, and then the North had their A team, which would be Ulysses S. Grant, fighting closer to Texas, somewhere there, against the B team of the South. So Ulysses S. Grant was just kicking ass and taking names, but they didn't like him in the North, so because the generals were like, no, that dude's a drunk or whatever. And so Abraham Lincoln was like, well, why don't we bring that guy who's winning over to this side to beat, why don't we bring Ulysses S. Grant to fight General Lee? And everybody was like, no, the dude's a drunk. And Lincoln is like, find out what the liquor it is, what liquor he drinks, so I can send a case of them to every single one of my generals. Get this guy over here. So it was kind of one of those things, like, we don't like that guy, so send him far away. Anyway, but in the case of the American Civil War, they did bring Ulysses S. Grant. Anyway, neither here nor there, just fun fact. Also, I wouldn't necessarily say that Darth Vader is not the A-team, but let's just say A1, A2, and A1 was jealous of A2, and so they was like, hey, send that guy away. Just send him out of here. He's a weirdo. Which, yeah, sure, he's kind of weird, but whatever. Anyway, the point is, Thrawn, genius, and since he was in the Outer Rims, he missed most of the, the fighting that brought down the Death Star and all that stuff, and he starts collecting everybody from the Outer Rims or whatever, and to rebuilding the Empire in secret. And that leads him to certain encounters with Luke, Leia, and Han Solo. So it's fun to see Thrawn just putting Luke, Leia, and Han in situations that are dire. You're reading it and you're like, oh my God, just out of the frying pan and into the fire. Just when you thought they're about to escape something, then you just feel the noose getting tighter and tighter on them. And the only reason why they are able to, at least on book one, come out in a situation that's maybe okay. Again, it kind of ends, it's not clear where things are going, and I haven't finished the whole story, but the only reason why they are, let's say, successful or Thrawn is unsuccessful is because Luke, Leia, and Han are extraordinary. And not only are they extraordinary, they play their A++ games, and they also kind of got lucky. So it's an S tier villain going up against S tier heroes on their best day, their best moment, and that's kind of how they survive. Because you feel like, oh, dude, they're dead to rights, and all of a sudden, like, how do you do it? But it's totally believable because again, they're the heroes, and you believe it. The issue with Rebels and the issue with Ahsoka is that you got what's supposed to be an S tier villain having trouble with the B team or being beaten by the B team. So you're no longer scared of him. He loses a lot of that fear factor, and so it's more of them doing Thrawn a disservice than anything else. So could it still go somewhere that's different? Maybe. They listen. Dave Filoni is doing his own thing in the Star Wars universe, and clearly Ahsoka's his favorite, and he's by far. I mean, he created the character, and now he's got our own show, and he's trying to bring an S tier villain into the Star Wars world in his own little microcosm of Star Wars. Is it set up for something interesting in the future? Sure. I just don't want him to keep doing so much bullshit, because it takes away from the show. Is there a way for Ahsoka to be able to take down Thrawn without bullshit? Sure. You can always find a way to write it, but again, and this is, we know, spoiler arena, but a perfect example. There's a moment where Thrawn, the only thing he has to do is make a ship take off to win, right? And for some reason, this takeoff is taken for fucking ever. No pun intended. And so Ahsoka, Ezra, and Sabine Wren, they're riding wolves, basically. They're not wolves, but whatever, like wargs. They're riding wargs to this tower to stop him. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I know that if my ship is floating around, like a freaking mile up in the air, and it's a freaking Star Destroyer. Oh, by the way, the Star Destroyer starts shooting down at them from their cannons, and they miss. Star Destroyer cannons that are meant to bypass, like energy shields and all that stuff and destroy the thing underneath anyway. They not only did they miss, the effect of the destruction of the ground was not enough to kill, the freaking wolves or whatever. Or, they could have just shot in front of them and ruined their path, make them go around, make the giant craters on the way. Or, they could have just blown up the fucking building. That way they can't climb up it. There's many things that could have been done that would have made like, oh, well, the villain wins. But, again, bullshit. And we're supposed to, and they're selling this guy super genius, but he's not doing the thing that would have made him win, and so the heroes are now winning by bullshit, and it diminishes the villain, and so it's not scary anymore. So that stuff annoys me, as you can tell. But anyway, there's a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of things where you're like, dude, they have you dead to rights. So just find more creative ways of getting the characters out of that situation, or don't put them in that situation to begin with. But whatever. Anyway, nobody listens to me. Nobody gives a fuck what I say when it comes to writing. The point is it good enough for me to be like, I'll watch season 2? Sure. Mostly because I'm curious to see what they're going to do with Balin and to see what they're going to do with Thrawn. If they do Thrawn the way they're supposed to and make him go against Luke, Leia, and Han, I'm 100% in. Because that's how it's supposed to go. Because at this point, the season ends, Thrawn is kind of back. The only one who really knows that he's back, well, I guess Ezra tells everybody, but he's still, I guess you could still kind of be a little bit secret. I don't know how that's going to work anyway, but whatever. They don't know where you are. They don't know where your base is. So him starting to collect like the force of the Empire and going up against Luke, Leia, and Han, cool. If it's just going up against the rebels, Ezra and Ahsoka, it's not going to be as good. I'll just stick to the books. But, whatever. And also, let's see what the hell they do with that Balin character. So, overall, show's kind of bullshit. There's one good episode, so if you only care about watching the good episode, it's episode 5, I think. That's the one with Hayden Christensen and the Clone Wars and stuff. So, there you go. As always, as I mentioned before, like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this channel, all that stuff. As always, comments, questions, suggestions, you can find me at Dario and at Super Dario World. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time.